Good morning. Greetings on this incredibly gorgeous morning, Sunday, February the 19th. I'm Pastor Carrie West. I serve the congregation in Sunrise Church in the community of Pueblo West and Pueblo, Colorado. And it's my deep honor this morning just to be alive. This week we've had, for those of you who don't live in the area, we had quite a bit of snow, which was such a blessing for our area as we are so dry, and kind of cold and some wind. But this morning is absolutely gorgeous, nice and warm. Barely a breeze. And as I walked out of my house this morning, I could hear the birds singing, which is always such a welcome sound for me, knowing because it just signals like spring really is coming soon, and new life and renewal all around us. So I am just really feeling God's presence this morning, which is great because we are talking about God's glory today. It is Transfiguration Sunday. So every year, for churches that follow a church year and who follow lectionary worship, we'll hear this story every year on this Sunday before Lent starts, which is like the end of Epiphany, right before Lent begins, and Transfiguration Sunday is marking the day that Jesus was with three of his disciples, and he was transfigured or transformed before them and before their eyes. And so it's once again. And this year, though, this story I think really comes as kind of the end point or the exclamation point to what we have been talking about throughout the season of Epiphany in the book of Revelation. And so last week I kind of said that like we would really talk a little bit more about God's glory. Now, so we'll talk about that in worship, but I want to give some context background because we're going to really focus on what does this transfiguration story mean for us today. And so I don't want to spend too much time on what it meant, what it might have meant in that time. But I want to give us just kind of like a broader sense of what's happening as we read, because we're going to hear it in Matthew's gospel, the transfiguration story. We can find it in Mark and Luke as well. Mark being the earliest gospel, we understand that Matthew and Luke probably borrowed stories from Mark, really followed Mark's kind of timeline as well. Matthew makes a few changes to Mark's transfiguration story, and those are kind of important. So I'd invite you to do that reading and comparing. But what I want to, the other reading that we have this morning is from 2 Peter. And so I just want to give a sense of all that is kind of going on when Matthew is writing his gospel, not when the transfiguration story is happening, but when it was being written and shared, which was after Jesus's resurrection and his ascension. And so I want you to just imagine, think about like the years 60 to say 95 CE, meaning Common Era, or you may be used to the term AD, which just means Anno Domini. That's the Latin. Sometimes we say after death, but that's not really true, and it's not after Jesus's death. Point is, like, we're just thinking about, say, about 30 to 60 years after Jesus died. And it is that time where Christianity and the Christian church, they were just struggling for a couple of different reasons. Number one, there was just so much conflict around the area, the culture, and Christians, especially with persecution from the Roman Empire, even some persecution and harassment from the Jewish brothers and sisters, and conflict within the body. And that conflict, a lot of that conflict came from this idea. What the disciples, apostles, really heard Jesus say was that Jesus was going to come again before the end of their age, meaning before they died, before the apostles and disciples were to die. And some of those apostles and disciples had started passing away, and Jesus hadn't come yet. Right. And then there comes a point where all of the apostles had died and Jesus had not come yet again. And so there was these questionings around, did Jesus tell the truth? Was Jesus really who he was? And that creates conflict within the church. And then there were false teachers who started to come up and try to get people to kind of stop following Jesus to this other kind of Jesus story. I don't understand it all, but just know that there are false teachers who are trying to dissuade those Christians, saying that they were lied to by the disciples, apostles about Jesus' second coming, that it was going to happen then. And so all this conflict, all this questioning around when is Jesus coming in? Why isn't he coming? And so really what we get in Matthew and in Luke and the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, 1st and 2nd Peter, all of this is coming and being written and shared in around, say, years 70s to 90, 95. So in the midst of all this turmoil in the Christian church, in the midst of all this turmoil amongst believers, these gospels are written and shared widely, and these letters and visions are shared widely to bring encouragement to Jesus's followers, to God's people, kind of as that reminder that Jesus is who Jesus said he was, the Son of God. The Transfiguration story then becomes this encouragement that the divine has been among human beings, and that the divine would continue to unveil itself to God's people. So John's vision that we have been studying in the book of Revelation, John's vision is this unveiling so that God's people would know God is still at work. God is doing all that God had promised to do, and God has finished what God has said to do. So again, that's that kind of, cyclorama, like everything's happening at once. So we just don't comprehend because it's God who's doing it. And so I just think this is important for us as we are considering the Transfiguration story today, is that this is so much about being encouraged by God, that God continues to unveil God's being through Jesus the Christ and through visions, through other people around us, that still today, as we are in the midst of turmoil in our world, God's glory is always going to encourage us. God's glory is always going to be available to us to be encouraged in our life and in our faith journey. And so this Transfiguration story, I think this year for us is really meant for us to help us open our eyes, because I think that it's easy for us to see only the turmoil, to really only experience the suffering and the hardships that we all go through. We focus on things like inflation and political divisiveness. We focus on denominational splits. We focus on all this stuff that's going on around us, and we fail to see God's glory that is always before us. And God's glory, if it's encouraging, is something we want to be seeking and have more of. So that's really where I'm going to be taking the sermon today. We're going to talk more about, where have we been seeing God's glory today? I can't wait to hear from people in the congregation about how they have experienced God's glory, maybe in the last week, but maybe even at other times that they have forgotten that they experienced it. So anticipate in worship a bit of time of testimony and sharing God's glory with one another, to encourage one another, to see our world as God's glory at work around us. I think that's why the birds chirping this morning was so glorious to me is it's just a reminder of God's creation that is always praising God, bringing tears to my eyes this morning. So I am excited to share the message with you this morning. I hope that you will be able to join us at church. And being at church can mean in person at 10 a.m., but being at church can also mean tuning in on Facebook or YouTube. And I would invite you to consider joining us on our website for worship this morning, 10 a.m., all places that you can come and experience God's glory together. So I hope you are encouraged and excited about this day that God has made. May the rest of your day be the very best of your day, and I hope to see you in church.